What's good, everyone? My name is Dark Char, and I have a banger of a tutorial for y'all today. So, pretty much we're going to talk about how to swap between a passive track to an active track, back to a passive track, over and over again, with it being seamless and, just not jittery. So, pretty much if I enter a combat scenario, this will fade into a combat track, and then you hear the combat track constantly. And once I finish the combat scenario, then I can fade back into a passive track and just sit around, chillax. Maybe perhaps I get into I get into a parkour section. Now I get back into the active track. Oh, spooky. And then finally, let's say for example, I get to the end and I go back to the main menu or whatever. Maybe I just get into a safe area where nothing is happening. Then we go back to the passive track, and all of it is very seamless. And this works with looping tracks, and this works with any track, and it's also modular. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so the first thing we want to do in this tutorial is we want to go ahead and import our music. So in my case, I've gotten 2 soundtrack loops from the game I'm currently working on called Knife Trick. It's a game that my friends and I have been working on. It's about 5 of us. The demo's out on itch. Go ahead and check it out. But anyways, enough plugging. Let's get back into the tutorial. So pretty much I have 2 tracks here. They're both equal in length. Your tracks don't have to be equal in length, but I will warn you that it is a jarring experience unless you want the tracks to be intentionally sounding so different that there is no harmony between both tracks. That's okay. But if you want there to be harmony between both tracks, I highly recommend that they're both in about the same length. And this is what the passive track sounds like. It's very subdued. It's very calm. And then this is what the active track sounds like. It's a lot more active, and it has a lot more drums in it. And basically what we're going to do, through some logic, is we're going to fade in, fade out between these 2 tracks, and we're also going to have some logic that starts those tracks at the point where they left off. So if the passive track is halfway through when we stop it, we'll start the active track halfway through. And the reason why we do that is so that way the switch isn't as jarring. Because if we were to say, for example, be in like an active battle, right? And it's like, like we have this active track that's playing and like you're in the middle of it. And then all of a sudden we go like as if it just started all over again. That's a little bit jarring. And we don't want that to happen. So we're going to have some logic in there that prevents that from happening. So let's go ahead and go into our blueprints. I have the third person template up, and pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to BP_ third person game mode. Now, one of the things I want to do with this code is I also want it to be modular. So if I'm in a different scenario or a different level or however you want to split up your active and passive tracks, if you have multiple, I want the logic to be the same, but I want the input for the logic, so as in the tracks that are actually going to be played, to be easily changeable, if that makes sense. So to do that, we're going to actually have the initialization of the tracks to be in its own individual function that we can call after event begin play and do things with it. So what we're going to do is we're first going to get an event begin play node. And after we get event begin play, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go into functions and add a new one, and we're going to type init music. And init stands for initialize. So the reason, again, why we're putting this into a function is because if you want to have the music to be differentiated between levels or differentiated between combat scenarios or whatever, then having a function whose sole purpose in life is to set up all the music tracks, but can be very modular when it comes to what music track is actually going to be played, is very useful to have. So that's how we're going to set this up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type in create sound 2D. The reason why we're creating a sound instead of playing a sound is because this creates a audio component that we can modify the sound, that allows us to modify the soundtrack that we're playing. And real quick, as a little thing that you need to do, make sure you uncheck auto destroy, because what's going to happen is whenever a track is not playing, we're going to pause it / stop it. And whenever we pause or stop something in Unreal, if it doesn't unpause, then it just destroys itself. It removes itself from memory, because that's just some memory cleanup stuff. Unfortunately for our cases, that's not a good thing. Most of the time it is a good thing. For our cases, it's not, but luckily it's a quick fix. Just make sure you uncheck auto destroy. Now that we've had that done, let's go to the sound input, drag out from there, and add it drag it over to this little purple node for the inputs. And this is going to add a new input of the type sound base object reference. We're going to call this passive. So now that we've created that input, what we're going to do next is we're going to right click here, promote this to a variable. We're going to call this passive music. So what we've done here is pretty much we have our passive sound, we create it, and after we create it, we then have it saved to memory through a variable. And this is important, as you'll see in a second. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go and create the active sound. So we're going to drag out of here, create sound 2D, same as before. And what we're going to do is open this drop down, uncheck auto destroy, and then what we're going to do, drag from this sound input, put it inside the purple node, go here, type active, and then once that's done, right click here, promote to variable, and then call it active sound. So now we've just created music, and we've just saved it to memory. And that's great. So now that we have that done, we're going to drag our init music out into event begin play, and now we play our music. So just as a real quick side note, you can do some logic here to kind of determine what should be the passive and what should be the active track. However, that's out of the scope of this tutorial. I want to keep this solely focused on how to change the music, the music between like a passive track and an active track smoothly. And because of that, I'm not going to be talking about how you do that, but just as some suggestions on how you would probably do it. You can either do this through a trigger box, like for example, the player goes through this trigger box, well then, this is a different encounter, thus the music must change. Or if it's level specific, you can just get the level name and then do a switch on string. And based on the string, you can then determine which active and passive track should be played. But because of the scope of this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to press this drop down and we're going to find our sound. So I'm going to type in knife trick because it's knife trick. And for me, passive track is knife trick between waves. And then for me, active track is knife trick gameplay. So now that we have those two loaded, the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to drag out of our passive music, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to type in play. And this will start playing the passive music. So we compile, save, and now if we go into play the level, the passive music starts playing, which is great. Now, there is one problem, and that problem is we can't change between both sounds, which is kind of the purpose of this tutorial. So how do we do that? Well, it's very simple. So what we want to do is we first off want to create a flip-flop. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a custom event. We're going to call this flip-flop music. And then what we're going to do is, based on the name of this function, of course, you could probably guess it, but we're going to go ahead and get a flip-flop. Now, flip-flop is a macro. The way it works is that every single time the execution line gets to this flip-flop, it will alternate between A and B. It starts, and it always starts with A first, and then it goes to B, and then A, and then B, etc., etc., etc. So, next thing we're going to do is on A, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our active sound, and we're going to type in fade in. I can't spell. So we're going to type in fade in, and what this does is that this fades in this linearly fades in the sound over time, and that duration can be whatever you want. In my case, I wanted it to be 2 seconds, and You can designate, if you wanted to, you can change how this is. So right, by default it's linear. You can also change it to logarithmic, sine S-curve, or sine of equal power. And you can also change how much volume this fade-in should be. And then for the passive music, we're going to go ahead and we're just simply going to do fade out. And what this does, and again, make sure the duration is the same as your fade in. And this will just fade out this music until it reaches 0, and then it stops it. And we're going to do the same thing down here, is if it's the active sound and we want it to go back to the passive sound, well, once we do flip-flop music again, B is guaranteed to have the active sound being played. So what we do is we get passive music, type in fade in, duration of however much you want. In my case, I want it to be 2. And same deal here, get your active sound, and you just want to type in fade out. And make sure that the duration is the same. Now, just to test this function, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the third person character. And on begin play, what we're going to do is we're going to type in get game mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to cast to third person game mode. BP_ third person game mode. If you're doing this within your own project, it'll be whatever your game mode name is. And pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to promote this to a variable. This name is perfect. And then we're just going to add Q. So keyboard Q. And then whenever we pressed it, we're going to get our game mode reference, and we're going to call flip-flop music. So when I press this button, it switches between the passive and active tracks. However, as you can tell, the experience right now is very jarring. And the reason why it's jarring is because it's always starting at the beginning. So how do we get how far long the song is? Well, that's a very simple question that with a kind of simple answer, although the logic behind it in Blueprints is weird, to say the very least, but it works. So just try your best to follow along with me here. This is a little bit more advanced because we are going to be playing with event dispatchers and event bindings. So pretty much back into init music, we're going to open this function up again, and what we're going to do is we're going to get the passive music, and we're going to go ahead and we're just going to call bind event to on audio playback %. Now, what happens is in C++, audio playback % is called every single tick the passive music is actively playing. Now, the problem is that we can't directly access this in Blueprints. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of bootleg it into Blueprints. And what I mean by that is we're going to use an event dispatcher. So when we bind an event, it's going to basically give us a event input. And what we do is simply drag out of this, we type in create event. And this is going to create an event that is and we're going to say create matching event. And we're going to call this passive playback %. Now, real quick, what you might notice is this is a event inside a function, which doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, if you compile this, it throws a bunch of errors. Why? Because this is not supposed to happen, and this is just a bug. So this is a very simple bug to fix. Highlight it, Control X, and then go back to your event graph, Control V it in, compile again, go back to init music, then go back to this create event, open the drop down, and then find your playback %. Then compile again, and then everything is fine. And we're going to do the exact same thing for active sound. We're going to drag out of it, bind event to on audio playback %. And once again, create event. And we're just going to pretty much create a matching event. Active playback %. Highlight this, Control X, go back to the event graph, Control V it back into the actual event graph, and then make sure you reselect it here. So now we have active playback percent. Compile it, save it, then boom. We've basically set up everything we need to do in the initialization of the music tracks. The next thing we're going to do now is pretty much we're going to actually understand how far along the track we are. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to do a very simple math problem. So we get a percent. So with that percent, we can. So based on the playback percent, the way this works is that this is a float between 0 and 1, with 0 being the beginning of the track and 1 being the end of the track. So because of that, all we have to do is we just have to multiply the duration of the track by the playback percent. Now, if you just have 2 tracks, you can probably just hard code whatever that playback percent is. But because I want this to be modular, and because I think having things to be being modular is just a lot better in general in programming, because of that, we need to figure out a way to get the duration. And the best way I've found of doing that, and let me know in the comments if you know a better way, is from this event we've created, we get the sound wave. So all we have to do is drag out of here, type in duration, and then boom, we get our duration of the passive track. So then what we do is when we get playback percent, we just drag out of duration first, multiply by our playback percent, and then that gives us a number of how far along the track we are in second notation instead of a percent notation. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click this output pin, we're going to say promote to variable, and then we're going to call this passive playback duration. Drag it in here, set it, and the same deal down here. Get the duration, playback percent, multiply it. Just for cleanliness, I like doing this instead. Although it's personal preference, it is a multiplication problem. It doesn't matter who's on which side. It's always going to be the same result. Once again, right-click on the pin, promote this to a variable, and then we're going to call this active playback duration. And boom, now we have the active playback duration. So now, as you can probably guess, we're just going to go ahead and feed these playback durations into the fade-ins and the fade-in sections. And you are almost right. There is, however, a problem. You see here, these tracks are looping. So if I go back to my music, these tracks are looping. And the thing is about looping tracks is, as they're playing, the percentage of they don't reset to 0% whenever they reach the end. Instead, what happens is they just keep on going. Because of that, when Unreal is calculating how much percentage of the music has elapsed, it will basically go above 1 in the float. So what will happen is it will basically now be, like 1.7. So if you go down here, the playback percent is going to be 1.7. So when the playback duration is actually going to be greater than the duration of the song. And that's a problem because if the track loops, then what's going to happen is when you do feed it how far along the track it is, it's going to be beyond the duration of the track itself. And because of that, it's going to start the track at the very beginning, because that's just a fallback method Unreal uses, I guess. So in order to fix that, we have to calculate how many times it has looped. So just to make sure the graph is clean, we're going to create a new function. We're going to call this calculate playback duration. And pretty much we're going to take in 2 floats as inputs. The first float we're going to take a float in as input, and we're going to get the duration, which is a float. And then, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take an audio component. And the reason why we're taking the audio component is because we're basically going to feed the active or the passive sound, because we want to understand what is the duration of the sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the sound ref, And the sound ref is going to be the same object type as the passive music in the app. I just realized, oh god, that's cursed. Hold on. There we go. Fixed. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Anyways, so I'm so sorry. I've renamed the active sound to active music. Again, it doesn't really matter, the naming, but it is what it is. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to get we're going to get an audio component. So we make this type sound ref to audio component. Object reference. Boom. And pretty much what we're going to do here is we're going to do a very special equation. We're going to use a very special built-in function that is surprisingly useful in this scenario. So first off, we're going to get here. Sorry, we're going to get the sound. And after we get the sound, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the duration. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our duration. And we're going to get, and just type in remainder, and we're going to get this division whole and remainder function. And what we're going to do is our dividend is going to be our duration that we fed in, and our divisor is going to be the duration of the sound itself. And the reason why we're doing this is because this way we our return value that's an integer is our whole number, and each whole number represents a loop. So for example, if there were 0 loops, then what will happen is there will only be a remainder, and the whole number down here is going to be 0. But if there are 2 loops, then this whole number will be 2. And the way we use this is we take our duration and then we subtract our duration multiplied by our whole number. So if it looped once, hold on. I'm so sorry. We then take our duration down here and we multiply it by our whole number. So don't take the duration that's inputted, take the duration from the sound reference that's down here. And what we're going to do is and the reason why we do this is because because every single time there's a whole loop, then there's at least a whole duration of the song within the duration of the song, if that makes sense. And the reason why we're subtracting that is because we're trying to get a number that's within the range of the actual song file that isn't being looped, because that's just how Unreal works. So that's why we do this, and then we just simply get our result from this multiplication, add that to our subtraction, and then we get our beautiful return node. So type in, right-click, add, type it, and then type add return node. And then we're going to go here, go do that, drag out from this pin, put it in here, and that's our return. Boom. And final thing, just to make everything pretty, go here, check pure. Boom. Done. Congratulations. You've just done math. Pat yourself on the back. So, pretty much what we're going to do now is we're going to call this function. And in this case, since it's the active music, what we want to do is we want to get the passive playback duration. And then for our sound reference, we want to get the passive music. And then when we open this up, we want, oh god, hold on. When we open this up, we're going to go ahead, we're going to get this return, put this into our start time, put this back up so that way we clean everything up. Put active music back down here, playback duration there. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing down here. So pretty much we're going to open up this drop down, and we're going to call calculate playback duration, plug the return into start time. And then in our duration, pretty much all we're going to do, since we're going from active to passive, we're going to put our active playback duration in here. And then we're going to put our active music sound reference in here. And yeah, there we go. So now, compile save. If we play this, and I press Q, it will automatically transition in that specific point in time. Now, just as a quick example of it working in an actual game setting, here's the project I'm currently working on, Knife Trick. Again, sorry for the shameless plug, but right now the music is passive because it's in between waves. Now the music is becoming active, enemies are spawning, having a nice fight. Keep on fighting them. And then once all the enemies are dead, it swaps back to the passive track. And yeah, and the way that we do this is that pretty much in the game mode itself, at least in Knife Trick, what we're doing is every single time an enemy dies, we check to see if all the enemies are dead. And if all the enemies are dead, then we just call a new wave. When we call that new wave, we want to make sure we basically change the music back to passive until the wave is ready to go, which then we change it back to active, and we just call that flip-flop function. So yeah, that's pretty much how we do it. The track is about to loop right now. And now the track is looped. And if we kill all the enemies, we go back into wave 3, and back into the passive, I mean, and just like that, we've successfully faded in and out, even though the music track looped. So yeah, this is a real-world application of the logic I just showed you. So whatever your projects, whatever you're working on, you can probably figure out how to get this to work on your end. Pretty much the way, again, how we do it is in new wave. Whenever we call new wave, we just simply flip-flop back to the passive music, and then once we're ready to start playing, we then call that same function again, and then we pretty much we spawn enemies, and we just go flip-flop music again. So however your logic wants to go, whether that be through trigger box, whatever you name it, you can do it. But yeah, that's basically the tutorial, and thank you so much. Peace.